Hello, everyone. Um, as you probably know, that this year I didn't change a lot from the previous manifestations of this course, mainly uh, not just from laziness because I had to make all new videos, but also I kept the Hunger Games up for this 1 year because the last movie's out and there's still an abiding interest in the series, and many people actually haven't read it. So that's there, but I did change feed. Now I've left information up about feed because it's an M.T. Anderson's novel. Is actually superb. It's about the mainstream of dystopian fiction, which has to do with technology and its abuses and potential gains. Um, and it's a love story too, and without necessarily a happy ending. But you might find it interesting if you want to read an extra novel, and this is a fabulous one to write on which to write your paper. But I did change Cory Doctorow's book Little Brother for a variety of reasons. One of which is that it remains for free on the if you go to his just Google it and you'll find all the links and whatnot to this intriguing and for me frightening book. I bid you all to, time permitting, that you read the sequel, which is called Homeland. Um, the Now the book was published in I think right around the end of April 2008. Now, during that time is the time of the financial crisis, or before that, really, and this ties in, especially with the sequel, when the economy is just drivel, and people are trying to make a go of it. Now, the novel itself is unlike most, if you will. I'm trying to think of everything that we're going to read is they place things pretty much in the future. For instance, an Unwind, the iPod, I think, is they find in an antique store. So it's not that far in the future, but I put it in the future to look at problems in the present in a more forceful way, and one could say that same about Saki Lloyd's book that you just finished, which is a focus on the environment that you'll find again in the final book of our journey through dystopia. Now, the Cory Doctorow's book, Little Brother, is his sort of it's a polemic in many ways because he's pissed off and worried, as the two essays at the end of the book suggest, one about hacking, as a matter of fact, and how good it is for us to have hackers. But it also predates Snowden, and the release in the WikiLeaks in many ways, the effect of WikiLeaks, and all the questions it raises about freedom and tyranny, if you will, depending on where you fall or where the newscasters fall. Is Snowden a hero, or is he an incredible villain? Now, if you read Doctow at all, you find that take away the man, the person Snowden, and what he released is a horrific account of all the things that have gone wrong in the name of freedom and security. The idea that we have is if you're against the government's actions to help us remain secure, then you're a traitor. Um, and this kind of a mentality that is very poignant for me. So the novel actually scares the hell out of me in many respects. And it's about something that's always been at the center of American literature in many, many respects, many ways, and it doesn't matter. It can be Catcher in the Rye, and the question has to do with what is democracy? What is freedom? And science fiction in particular has played on this all the way from the body snatcher movies to um, the more Ex Machina today. Um, how does technology impinge upon freedom? Now, technology here in our story also takes in a very, very poignant um, topological landscape. It takes place on one, and that has to do with post 9/11. Um, and what happened? Now, what happened after 9/11? If you remember it, or you can read about it, it's one of those moments where you remember where you was. I was in the president's office because he was out of town, watching, and just as I was watching the second passenger jet hit the Twin Towers, I'm thinking, whoa! And the fears that came from that, and the passing of the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Department, and I've always hated that. The name of Homeland, it just conjures for me too much aggression on the part of the government against its citizens. We're being attacked. And just recently, in Congress, you have in the Senate our Libertarian presidential candidate doing a wonderful, wonderful talk for hours and hours on why we have to amend the Patriot Act. We can't let it go in its present form, and it didn't. And it all had to do with what the NRA is doing, the National Not Rifle Association, NSA, National Security Association, which ironically, as someone had pointed out, is the only really government agency that actually does listen to what you talk about. Now, you can say someone's paranoid about it, but the fact of the matter is, collection of telephone messages. And so our senator from Tennessee also garnered the support of many people from both sides of the political spectrum, including Bernie Franks, so you say all sides, if you will, and concerns about the freedom of the American people and what's been done in the name of security and homeland security. And is this place, as Snowden's documents have suggested, run amok? The novel then posits what goes on and what could go on. In the novel, Mark is our young hero, is a junior at Chavez, was one of my heroes from the 60s, Cesar Chavez, a school outside of San Francisco, and a terrorist attack takes place, actually instigated by Al-Qaeda. By the way, they're not caught in the sweep that takes place in San Francisco. And what happens is that there are always contingency plans. So they've been around for a long time. For instance, you take an example of the kind of what someone has called crisis economics, that there are all these plans to privatize things and just waiting for the opportunity. So if you look at books that have written about post-Katrina and you look what happened to public schools, wait for the crisis and then implement things immediately. In the Hunger Games, this happens. When in the games something doesn't go the way Capital wants, you'll find that suddenly all the power is turned out in 12, and when it's turned back on again, we have a new regime. Now they have to work longer and deeper, and these things are set up as a way of punishment, all in the name of security. And so the questions that Cory Doctorow is asking in this book and the sequel have to do with something that's very much on the minds of many people. Now, the book itself takes place in San Francisco, and it involves youngsters incredibly interested in technology, and in this particular case, hacking. Now, in Snowden's world and in the world of Cory Doctorow, hackers perform incredibly important functions because a system is only as secure as the people who would like to break the system are in the dark. And so he goes all the way back to his hero, Marcus's hero, and certainly Cory's hero is a guy that just made that beautiful movie about the code breaker during the Second World War, Alan Turing, probably the inventor of the computer and other things that were going on around then that now have very important roles in our world of surveillance technology. The things have changed. I was joking to my wife the other day. Is in my generation, I was born in 1950, that I always think that when you have paranoia, two things. One, always lock the door when you take a shower, because we grew up watching Psycho. And so you say, oh my God, you're vulnerable there, so lock the door, or someone will knife you in the shower. And many of you talk about your parents, and you'll find that most of them lock the door when they take a shower. The other one is in the late 60s, 70s. It says, if you think you hear footsteps, you do. Big Brother is watching. And so you have the little brother is the YA equivalent of the kind of 1984 polemics that goes on here. I had a friend of mine I have not seen for many, many years, 30. It's a young lady that I knew in high school, not so young anymore. And we decided to get back in touch. And we have. It's been very nice. And she says, well, maybe I'll learn how to use Skype. Well, she never has learned how to use Skype. And the other reason is that she does not like the green dot on her MacBook Pro. And that is the one that I'm looking at right now as I create this video. And she put a Band-Aid over it because she was convinced that people were watching her. When she would walk across in her underwear or whatever, that goes on in your house. And I thought, well, man, she is taking a right-hand turn into the world of paranoia. Until I read this book, and then read more about this book. In fact, people can watch you, even when your computer's off. So she's not so paranoid. And this is the reality of the possibilities in this book. If you walk down the streets in England all day, you probably get photographed 500 times. And now all the new spy shows and television shows like White Collar and whatnot are always using these surveillance cameras and whatnot. They're there. But also snooping is there. And someone say you've been hacked. A lot of people have been hacked. Their Facebook things have been compromised. This is chicken feed compared to what can happen. While you're reading the book now, Xboxes, Lynx paranoia, I mean, the list goes on of all these devices and these, pirate places where you can do your email and leave it in Sweden somewhere. They're all real. If you take the time to look them up, Cory has not made up much here. He's taken what we have and hinting at what could happen, and then chronicling the effects this could have on a population. And so it is a love story, a little love story, and maybe some sex in there, a little bit. I get mixed up a little bit only because I have read the sequel in this book. I just finished them, last week before I started rereading Saki Lloyd. These are all real. The scenario is fiction, which is to say, a terrorist's attack and blow up. We're never convinced about really what the total damage is. The Golden Gate Bridge or the San Francisco Bridge. They hit the biggest one, the one where the most traffic goes over. and part of Bart. And that's when it starts. That's when the overreach of a severe haircut lady um, for Homeland Security, and you enter into this area now. Feed was a huge success. Lots of winning, and this one. Little Brother was on a New York Times, best-selling list for literature of this kind for young adults. In addition, um, it touches on not only what could happen, but I want to play the severe haircut lady is a fictional character, but it is one of the kind of people who believe in the system and believe uh, in what happens when they get the power that they get over people. As Marcus says, when he for severe haircut, when it first interrogates him, it's not an interview; it's an interrogation. He has not been arrested, been picked up because he was in the right place at the wrong time, and has an interest in um, the internet and these kinds of things. And he says to her before he gives up everything, because he's 17 years old, he's scared to hell. He gives up information. But first he says, the only people who's terrorizing me are you, and I stand by the Constitution. And they basically laugh at him. And they waterboard him. Now, Feed caused a lot of controversy because of the prevalence of the F word and other language. And M.T. Anderson's remark was, as people become less and less literate, they start using this language and take pride in their ignorance. And this is what opens the way for the loss of freedom. And so he just used the way language was used. This book raised a lot of hackles, and I think if you just read the Wikipedia page, you can also, there's lots of, the notes are all over the place about the themes, but this disturbed a lot of people because here you are torturing teenagers. You're talking about teenage paranoia. You're talking about huge issues amongst mixed up teenagers like loyalty and freedom, security, family, and this incredible paranoia, which all happens to be true. As one of the moments of Desai is when poor Narcus is kept in a cell in isolation. He's worried what's happening to his friends, especially the one that was knifed in the chaos of what went on. And he's trying to find people, and what people do as a result. One of them is Van, and the other people distance themselves from him until he meets up with Angie, and they start fighting back. These were considered by many people just too rough for a YA audience. And when they approached Corey to change a couple of these things, the answer was no, not changing a damn thing. So this book is bold, and it's in your face. Take back to what we talked about before, or I have, about what science fiction, and especially dystopian fiction, accomplishes. And in this case, for the young. In Hunger Games, people are hurt. If you get involved to try to change things, you're going to feel the consequences of it, especially if you go up against the status quo. This is frightening for youngsters, especially, as I said, in a world today when, in the United States in particular, you have divides on the wingnuts, and nothing seems to get done in Congress, and the media just gets depressing. And what can one do? Does one want to get into politics? And so the pressure on youngster is immense. And then this book comes along and puts youngsters in positions into which adults would generally not even find themselves involved, because they're at the center. They're at the center of the possibilities for change in the future. And it's like Saki Lloyd's character, our Laura says at the end, just one day at a time. but the knowledge that and the Mockingbird may, in effect, end up. She doesn't become president, which often happens in these books, but she does continue to suffer. She has the book that she puts together to try to change things, but she's not in the position of a leader, which is good. And then certainly at the end of even Homeland Security, the protagonist may have made the statement, but the story is also about the limitations of what someone like a Marcus can do. He's a bright kid, and he can't change the world. He can nail the woman and her cohorts, but he's not going to get rid of her. He does not have that power. And this is one of those the kinds of things that people who write and criticize YA literature and a book such as this one, because the fact of the matter is that, and I may have said this before, much of the pre Pullman days, well, let's just leave it. Let's just say that Collins caught it in the Hunger Games. Traditional YA avoided dystopia. It was into the utopian image. I mean, in its own way, our book today, the one you're reading, the Saki Lloyd, and the one that you're going to read, this book posits the possibility for a better world. But it doesn't just dissolve all the controversies and there's just like everybody's going to be happy. This was traditional children's literature. A great writer, I'm trying to remember his name now, he wrote The Iron Giant. Wrote a lot of children's work, was a poet laureate of England, but he basically said we owe children the truth. This was in the 60s. And in the second flowering of children's literature, you have more confrontation with things like racism. But it took a while for the dystopian to catch up. Now, the catch-up comes when they break the authors start breaking this kind of rule. And Corey, with his no, is right there. The rule was, well, you can show some kind of turmoils. And the Iron Giant is a good one at this one. But in the end, everything has to be good. So you set up this logical system. And science fiction is very logical and rational and making you believe in the possibility of the world the author creates. But for the denouement, for your young characters, there had to be a happy outcome. So there'd be love, and more often than not, the kids would become the new leaders and all that kind of stuff. That just flies in the face of the logical setup. Well, Hunger Games, all the books you're going to read, pretty much don't do this. And that's a lot of times why a lot of people really dislike the third book of the Hunger Games, because it's not happy. Lots of people get killed. The daughter, the sister, parents. People have scars that won't go away. And so this, for instance, Marcus keeps having the kind of nightmares that Katniss had. And walks around worried all the time, about the basic thing. He goes to the Turk to get coffee and uses cricket. Cash only. I believe in, I came here to, from Iran or Turkey. He calls them the Turks, so there's Turkey, because I wanted freedom. And now you see they're following your cards. And so, you go on the subway and you press a button and there's the card. It can follow you everywhere. So they get a system, something you can just buy at Radio Shack if you were into this world and what goes on, and you'd be able to go around and mess everything up so that people were following people all over the place. But here they already have the people who did it, and they're still nailing people. They're still increasing, ratcheting up the screws so that San Francisco, in a way, seems isolated, but it's just a testing ground for how you can control citizens. Look at it in the regular way. Look at just something silly. I bought a little backpack from Duluth Traders, and I looked at a couple other things. And the next time I went to Amazon.com, or I go to Facebook, and all these kinds of things where I last search are everywhere. Now, Feed is about that. But so is our novel about the young Marcus and his cohorts trying to preserve their freedom by going up against incredible odds. Now, look at the lines between the father and the mother, too. The mother's British, and so she gets her hackles up a little easier than the father does. But the father is in a job that he believes that this technology will make the world a better place, a better, safer place. Until, of course, it turns on him as well. And he will learn eventually what happened to his son. And you find a muckraking journalist is willing to break the story. And people, it's a novel, too, about courage. And I think that's the biggest thing. The courage to stand by convictions. And here you notice, too, that our word of hacker is stuff like, the Chinese have broken in and we've cyber attacked the North Koreans, and, all manner of different kinds of things. But in the hacking world, it doesn't operate that way. It's more from if you read a little more of what we call William Gibson-inspired literature, about council cowboys and cyberspace, these terms, by the way, invented by science fiction writers. A lot of it's not necessarily doing devious things. It's the challenge. So we find in the beginning that Marcus is in trouble because the principal of the school thinks that he's the one who has done things like release the answer book for the testing, and he has his little not alias. I'm trying to think of what you would use if you were doing the radios. You have your name, and his name's there is floating around, and he wants to keep that name secret. He's not like the Mr. Innocent. He's a teenager who's can get in trouble against the system. But notice what goes on, too, in the schools, because this is what goes on today. Surveillance in high schools, in the classroom. Why do we need it? Well, the gunmen have broken in. Should we have guns in the classroom? And also, who is it that's doing the spying? And I'll leave you with one, because I'm not going to go into all the details of the book, but I want you to think of its repercussions. And it's not just to make you a left-wing radical. It's the consequences. The circuses and bread, entertainments and sustenance. This is in Book 3. Plutarch is talking about the Roman satirist who said that the people of Rome, he wanted to reinstate the Republic, which wasn't going to happen. But he's a very backward looking, about trying to make the present reflect what was going on in the past that may well have not gone on, actually. But he wrote that, what you, in the full text, not the little one that Plutarch has in there, says to the effect, well, you've given up your freedom for the comfort of stability, if you will. And what's happened is they give up the right to vote. They gave up all these kinds of things. And the Roman emperors now have that. And he says something like the vaults are starting to burn, which is the next step of the excess, which would be the torture and all that kind of stuff. But he also, and this is important because this is a role that Cory Doctorow would say, and many others too, that the hacker plays, the person who really learns the system and challenges it at all times. The same author is not Marshall, and I can't think of his name today, but it doesn't really matter, said, "Who watches the Watchman?" Which, by the way, is the title of one of the great Alan Moore, I believe, graphic novels of all time, and I love to teach that book. But the idea was, who watches the Watchmen? Now, the author was making a joke about it when he did it. The Roman author, the guy wanted to know if his wife was sleeping around, so he was paying this person. And the satire was, well, who's watching the guy that's checking out your wife to see if she's is sleeping around? Well, get in line. And here we do have is that who watches the Watchmen here, and thus, for people like Datao and others, and WikiLeaks in particular, that brings up the whole question of how much information really needs to be secret, and what is the government doing with all the information compiled. And look at those numbers in there, even if it's 99% sure, and you go to New York, you're going to have to, arrest 250,000 people. He says, but nothing is 99. It's more like 40%. And so what you're doing is creating a repressive society that creates the haystack in which the needle can hide. I believe that is the sort of mixed metaphor that's used in your story. So enjoy it. Don't get too paranoid. But it'll set us up for the second part of the semester, when we're going to read The Knife of Never Letting Go, an award-winning, including a prestigious Tiptree Award, which is part of a trilogy, the only book that takes place on a different planet. And, of course, Unwind, which is another part of a tetralogy. And then the only book that we have that really doesn't have a sequel is the last one we read, which is very short, and very different in some respects. So enjoy this book, and really get to it on the discussion threads. And I'll leave them open until Monday because you have your exam and things along those lines. But I hope you all enjoy this book a lot.